welcome to the Newsroom Pub. I'm Milwaukee Press Club President Corrinne Hess from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. I'm so happy to be here today with Lisa Byington, TV play-by-play announcer for the Milwaukee Bucks. Before we get started, I want to thank our event sponsors. Our presenting sponsor is Spectrum News 1. Our supporting sponsor is We Energies. I would also like to thank our event partner, WisPolitics.com. WisPolitics partners with the Press Club for this luncheon as part of an ongoing event series in Milwaukee, sponsored by UW-Milwaukee, Wisconsin Academy of Global Education and Training, 1125 CAPS, the Milwaukee Police Association, the Firm Consulting, Medical College of Wisconsin, and Spectrum. Now I'd like to welcome our media panel. We have Delaney Bry from TMJ4 Sports, Greg Matzik from 620 WTMJ, and Stephanie Sutton from WISN TV. Sorry. Now back to Lisa. In 2021, Lisa became the first female full-time play-by-play voice of major men's professional sports team when she was hired by the Bucks. Lisa is also the first female play-by-play voice to cover the NCAA men's basketball tournament for CBS and Turner Sports. And in 2017, she was the first female play-by-play voice for college football in the Big Ten Network. She also just told me that she's going to start working with the WNBA, so she's not taking a break. We're so excited to have you with us today, Lisa. Thank you for coming.
Do you guys mind if I take this off? It feels way too official for me to kind of stand here at the podium. You guys can hear this okay? It's not like I never used a mic before or anything. Thank you for inviting me. It is a true honor to be here. I walked in and it's like a journalism's like sports bar, right? Like I just find myself like this, like staring up at all the signatures that are here on the walls and so much history, right? And that's what I've learned about Milwaukee. I've been to Milwaukee for other work assignments before. Obviously, and here now a lot more than I was, but still this is little like nooks and crannies and stuff of this city and of the people and of the community that I still love discovering about this job. It's gonna be a little different for me, guys be nice to me, right? I'm always like the one asking questions, and I'm always the one fielding questions. So it'll be a little bit different to be on this side, but I certainly hope to share my story in whatever you guys are curious about. I was just telling someone that when I was meeting up here before this event started, that I started in the smallest market, or the second smallest market in the country, in Alpena, Michigan. I don't know if anyone here knows where Alpena, Michigan is. We all know where the Upper Peninsula, right, is, and so it's about 30 minutes south of getting to the Mackinac Bridge and the Upper Peninsula. Made about $14,000 in my first job, and really applied for that job with a news tape. I went to Northwestern University. You got a Wildcat? Oh, and sitting front row too, right? As any nerdy Northwestern student would do. I appreciate you. What's your name? Okay, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Go Wildcats. But at the time, and they changed a lot, but at the time they didn't have a sports specific, Syracuse was by far and away ahead of everyone in that. So I had to apply for sports jobs using a news tape, which is what I did in Alpena, Michigan. And that was my first job in broadcasting, and just always truly believed that it's not where you start, it's where you finish. And if you work hard, you treat people the right way. Never look at your paycheck, never look at how many hours you've worked. You will eventually get to the places that you want to go. And certainly here in the NBA with the Milwaukee Bucks has been a dream for me. Who wouldn't want to talk about this team? I always tell people across the NBA, it's a really easy product to talk about. So I lucked out with this job. And it has been wonderful, from the people to the franchise to the organization to the quality of basketball. I have just enjoyed myself here so far. And you're number one. I'm used to signing off with no applause. on TV, we don't get any response, direct response, that is.
Hi Lisa, I'm Stephanie. We haven't officially met, but I've seen you and I enjoy your work. You're fantastic your first year. It's awesome to see a woman do play-by-play for the Bucks.
Thank you.
About time, you know what I mean? I will ask you, and Joanne Williams, by the way, the woman you were just speaking with, a Milwaukee TV legend. She worked at Fox 6 for decades, so she's fantastic as well. I don't know if you remember, we actually played tennis back in the day, in the late 90s or something like that. Anyway, getting back to Lisa really quick. So what are your impressions of Milwaukee as a sports town and the fans? I mean, is this what you expected when you received the job?
Yeah, absolutely. I had mentioned that I had been to Milwaukee. Well, first of all, let me start out. I mentioned Michigan, so I'm a Midwest person my entire life. I grew up in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and in NBA world, I grew up as a Detroit Pistons fan, so the Bad Boys. Grew up listening to George Blaha over in Detroit. He was my first NBA voice that registered with me. He's still doing the Pistons job right now. So yeah, so I'm used to the Midwest attitude. I'm used to sports fans being passionate in the state of Michigan. I mentioned I went to Northwestern. Chicago, as we know, is another passionate sports city. And then, I would frequent up here, NCAA tournament, covering Marquette, and so I became familiar with the state of Wisconsin and Milwaukee. And I love the fact that there are few sports teams to embrace in this state, right? And so the fewer the teams to embrace, the more passionate, right? The more passionate the level is going to rise for this state, for this city. That's what I appreciate. When I was watching the NBA Finals, I think by a lot of people in the country when they watched the Deer District, that was one of the first times in more recent memory that it really, really registered how passionate this city is, how much a sports team can connect all of us. Not just dozens of people outside, but we've seen, right, the pan across the stream of humanity outside Five Star Forum. And to me, I looked at that and I thought I want to be a part of that. I grew up in Michigan. I went to school in Chicago, and I've frequented Wisconsin enough that I knew the passion. I understand the passion of those kind of sports fans in all those different places, and it certainly hasn't disappointed in year one.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Greg.
I often wonder about the NCAA tournament because it's overwhelming from a fan perspective because it's just game after game after game. When you get assigned a region, how much of a cram session is it to learn about all these different schools? And oh, by the way, the small school in Connecticut, you need to make it sound like you've been covering them all season because their fans want you to be that way.
Yeah, you fake it until you make it, right? Isn't that the phrase? Last year was my first year doing the NCAA tournament as a play-by-play. I started as a sideline reporter for CBS and Turner. And I always watched the play-by-plays when I was sideline thinking, that first day you have to prep for 8 teams and 4 games in one day. And sometimes, Greg, to your point, it's 8 teams who you haven't seen all season long. And so I always thought as a sideline reporter, how in the heck are those play-by-plays prepping for that? And I'm so glad that's not me right now, And eventually that became me. Last year was a little bit of a different setup. I don't know if you guys probably remember, because of COVID, everything was on one site, right? So it was Indianapolis. So it was a little bit of a different dance in that way, in the fact that I got an assignment. I was doing Oral Roberts, Florida, and I got that assignment on Saturday. The game was on Sunday. I got that assignment on Saturday as I'm going to the arena to prep for another game, 2 other games on Saturday. So literally, it was a totally different environment last year. This year, it was back to the same setup. 8 teams, 4 games, 1 day. So what I did is, when I knew I was going into it, I called some play-by-plays who I have respected and enjoy their work, the Brian Andersons of the world, right? Mr. Wisconsin, talked to Ian Eagle, talked to a lot of different people who have done the tournament, and asked them how they approached it. And they said, Lisa, I know you, and you like to know every nook and cranny of every little research thing about a player, a team, a coach, and you can't do that for the NCAA tournament. It's impossible because you're getting your assignment on Sunday. Some people have games on Thursday. So that's a 3-day prep for, like I said, 8 teams in 4 games in 1 day. So I had to learn how to pull back, which was not easy. I'm always the one that's going 100 miles an hour in terms of prep, research, that sort of thing. So I really had to be realistic with those assignments with the NCAA tournament and trying to figure out, what do I really need to know? You know, is it more valuable? The schools put out all kinds of research notes and game notes and all that kind of stuff. But is it more valuable for me to read features, as an example, to understand where the teams have been, to understand the background of their star players? So I made sure that I knew the starters of every team, all 8 of those teams, front and back. And a little bit, and maybe a nugget or 2 of the 6th or 7th best player, but it was not easy, you know. And I don't know if anybody else in this room has been put in that setting where you're overwhelmed with work, and you got to figure out what's the bare minimum that I need to do to be able to succeed. Where can I pull back? Where do I put my focus? And so that definitely was a learning process for me the last 2 years.
Well, 2015. My first job offer was Alpena, Michigan.
Those are really
$92,000 a year, and I did not take it. Obviously, I made a
Wow.
mistake. Because you're here and I'm right here. Asking you the questions.
You make $5,000 more than I did then.
In 2015,
Yeah.
it's not a lot of money.
No, it's not. It's not.
As my dad told me, that's a long way to go to fail.
Did
Because I'm
you,
from Texas.
Brown Trout Festival, right?
Yep.
Brown Trout Festival, Alpena Community College Lumberjacks, still there, yeah.
So fun how the world is so small.
Yeah.
As a fellow woman in sports, sometimes we easily get burnt out. And for me, my motivation always comes from remembering the people who told me I couldn't do it. For you, where does that motivation come from to continue to keep it fresh and continue to do what you do and smile? You know what I mean? And act happy, and sometimes you're not.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes from day one, where you know I said in my opening comment, you don't look at your paycheck and you don't look at how many hours you're working, and when you realize that you're not doing that, you know you're doing the right thing. My second job, so that was my first job in Alpena, Michigan. My second job was in local news in Lansing, Michigan. I worked for the CBS affiliate there, and back when we were still using tape. Right, and we had to archive our stories that we were working on for the day. Sometimes it would add up, and sometimes we would save the archive process until Sunday night when we were done with the newscast. So I remember it was 1 February, and I just got done anchoring sports for the 11 o'clock local sportscast, and I had to do an archive thing. So it literally took me to like 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. And you know, I was to the point of at the brink of, is this what I want to do? And so I was walking out, and as you know, and much like a February in Wisconsin, a February in Michigan, you walk out. My car was the only one left in the parking lot because it was 2 a.m. and it had been snowing, so my car is covered. I have to, scrape off the snow off of my car at 2 a.m. I had just worked a full day. And I walk out and I started to think, is this worth it? And who cares? And I stopped myself, and I don't know what it was, if it was the snow, if it was, the scraper in my hand or whatnot, but it just resonated with me that all of a sudden the person who cared was me. And I had this voice internally that said, Lisa, you care. You care. And at 2 a.m. in Lansing, Michigan, at the CBS affiliate there, I realized that I was doing the right thing. And what I like to remind people is, if the first answer to that question of who cares is not you, then that's the sign. You gotta look for something different. You gotta pursue a different job. You gotta look somewhere else. But I was able to do that then. And that allowed me to be present where my feet were, stop worrying about what the next step was, and having faith that the next door would open when the time was right. Not necessarily on my timeline, because it's never on our timeline, right? It's on someone else's timeline, but the timing is always perfect. And so I think if you put priorities in the right spot at the right time, and you're passionate, you're still passionate about what you do, then you'll find your way through the no's and you can't do this and all the naysayers.
Sort of a follow-up to that, and being a female broadcaster, and I know what I've had to deal with for the last 25 plus years. What are some of your bigger obstacles that you've had to face to get to where you are today? And who has helped you? Men? Women? Like, how did you get from, the beginning to where you are now?
Yeah, well, I'll give you a little bit of a background that my parents, first of all, I'll answer that question backwards. My parents have been fantastic. And they have never, when I was a little girl, they never gave me gender-defined roles. This is what you do, Lisa, because you're a girl. This is what little boys do. So I was at, an elementary school at recess, and it seemed like all the boys played soccer at recess. And I was a soccer and basketball player, so I wanted to go out on recess and play soccer as well. And so I did, and I was the only girl. And I would come home and talk to my parents, what'd you do in school today? What'd you do at recess? And I would say, I would play, soccer with the boys. And my mom would say, with the boys? And I'd say, yes, and no other girl wants to play. She said, oh, that's good, Lisa, if that's what you want to do. And so at the age of 6, 7, 8 years old, that was the foundation that my parents laid for me. Really early on, said you don't do things because you're a girl or a boy, you do things because you want to do them. And so that was really important for me, I think, to learn that lesson. You don't process that, obviously, when you're a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old, but that was something for me to process at that time. So I never looked at it as, I'm constantly reminded of it, especially in taking this job, I'm constantly reminded of my gender. But when it's game day, and I put on the headset, I always say that is the most normal part of this job, because it's what I do. I talk about basketball. I love sitting next to Marcus Johnson, or who was Zora Stevenson, our production staff, and that's when it's normal. What's not normal is actually answering all the questions about being a woman and being an announcer, because I honestly do not, when I put on the headset, I do not think of myself female announcer. I'm thinking of my prep, right? I'm thinking of my prep, my research going into that day. I'm thinking of announcing the game. Not as a woman, not as a female, not as a gender-specific announcer, but as an NBA announcer. So for me, because I think my parents had planted that seed early, I just assumed that it's natural. You go for what you want to go for. And if someone tells you, well, that's strange because you're a girl, you're a woman, or you're a female, then that's on them, And I have gotten plenty of no's in the hiring process. There were times where I could only do women's sports as an announcer. I think, bosses were hesitant to put female voices on men's games, but on the flip side, I would see tons of men doing women's sports who were never questioned. But again, because you have that attitude of it's on them. And if you keep working hard and you keep doing the best that you can do and you become the best candidate for that job, then it's going to be hard to say no to you, regardless of what your gender is.
Do you recall your first play-by-play ever, associated with a job, like your real job, the headset's on? What was it? Where's the tape? Do you ever listen back to it?
Well, so 2 answers to that. Actually, when I was in college, I played at Northwestern, so I played 4 years of basketball at Northwestern, 2 years of soccer, and so I was an analyst my very, very first game. If you're talking about when I very first put on the headset, it was for radio, for WNUR. You appreciate that, right? And it was an Indiana Northwestern game, and Bob Knight actually was still the coach at Indiana. I'll tell you how long ago that was. And I was awful. Yes, I do have the cassette tape. No, you're not going to get it. And I haven't listened to it in years. I should. But that was as an analyst. As a play-by-play, it was for Big Ten Network. And again, I was in Lansing, Michigan. Big Ten Network began in 2007. So they were looking for all kinds of announcers in 2007. It was year number 1. And let's remember too that the Big Ten Network was the first conference-only network. So they set the standard for SEC Network, ACC Network, Pac-12 Network. Those things didn't exist. And everyone was, I'm sure you guys remember, everyone was thinking Big Ten Network, like really? They're gonna air Big Ten sports 24/7? How's that gonna work? So in year 1, they were looking for anyone. I happened to be in Lansing, Michigan, working local news at the time. And I had picked up a couple of sideline reporting jobs for Big Ten Network. I had a really great boss at our local station. He said, Lisa, I'm gonna make time for you to do some of these things because I think it might lead to something bigger. And it did, he was right, and I'm so grateful for him to this day. But I had never been a sideline reporter before. And then my phone goes off as I'm literally actually walking into a camera room. Because at the local affiliate, you had to pick up your own camera, put it on your shoulder, shoot your own highlights, edit your own tape, write your own scripts. And so I was, as reporter, anchor, writer, producer, camera person, was about to go into the camera room to grab my camera and my phone goes off. And it was one of the bosses at Big Ten Network. And he said, hey, we've had kind of a schedule switch. I know you're in Lansing, we have a women's basketball game, it's Michigan State, Indiana. Would you be interested in doing it? And I thought, yeah, what's so hard about play-by-play? It's gotta be something like anchoring a newscast, right? And he said, no, actually it's a little bit different, and because I had never, when I watched sports, as a little girl, I always watched as the athlete. I never watched for the announcers. So never really paid attention to their roles, their cadence, what they did do, what they didn't do, what they emphasized, what they didn't emphasize. I always watched as a player because I thought I would be the player. I thought I was going to be the Olympian. I thought I was going to be the one who's the national championship that the announcers were talking about. So it wasn't really late into my college career that I started paying attention to announcers. So when I got this phone call, I hadn't really paid attention to play-by-play, analysts, sideline reporting, or anything like that. I did the job, worked the game, was awful, but not awful enough that they didn't ask me to do it again. And I firmly believe that you never say no to opportunity, especially when you're trying to work your way up. So, was I scared? Yes. Did I know what I was doing? No. Was I determined to try to figure it out? Absolutely. And so in every opportunity that they gave me, and I did everything from field hockey to football to gymnastics to softball to volleyball to soccer, and said yes to it all. And then you say yes and you figure it out along the way. But I do. I remember that first women's basketball game, and I will go back and watch that one. I'm not sure I'll listen to the cassette tape with me as the analyst. I'll just leave it like that.
Lisa, you mentioned that the way you approach it, you don't think I'm a female, play-by-play or anything like that. But at the end of the day, for me growing up, it was Holly Rowe because I watched softball, and that was the only female personality on ESPN. And now that I get to do this job, I think, how cool is that? Because one, you wouldn't imagine having 3 women work. There at 3 women work in all of the local. Or 4 CBS stations here and Fox, TMJ4. For you, is there pride in knowing that even though that's not how you approach things, that at the end of the day, that's what you are, and you're opening doors for other people, whether you realize it or not?
It's just as meaningful for me to hear, I did my first college football game for Big Ten Network, and they made it a big deal. And it was just as meaningful for me to hear, hey, my little daughter, my daughter was watching you on TV, and this is great because now she has a vision of what she can be. Now there's another job out there that she knows, maybe I could do that too. I love those stories. And I don't want to say I love it more, but I think it's important and awfully, it's neglected sometimes to think about all the little boys who are also watching. Because this is not just a little girl story or a little boy story. It's gender allies, it's men supporting women. And so those are equally as important. Much like if you ever asked someone about, the path that they're creating, Giannis is at a different level. But if you were to ask any of those players, Giannis, what's your legacy? How are you impacting people? I don't think if there is an opportunity to impact people in whatever profession you're doing, I think it's similar with me in that I don't think about that at the time. You love to hear the stories about how things are changing, perspectives are changing. New hires, that's the biggest thing, right? Is hires have to be made for change to happen. But it's also got to be both men and women, and too often I think we focus on, what females impacted you, what little girl was watching you, but men have to be there as well. Men have to be gender allies. Little boys have to see women in these roles for it to become natural. I've always said that it's my dream that one day a female voice becomes background noise on a men's sporting event. And when I say that, I'm kind of getting some blank stares in the room too. And this is what I mean by that, because there's going to be background noise, so that's not very flattering. This is what I mean. Think of how many times you have a game on in the room, and it's background noise. And you're not thinking twice about who the announcers are, because they're 2 male announcers or 3 male announcers, and it sounds quote unquote normal. And I'm guilty of this as anyone, when I'm listening to a game and there's a female on an NBA game or a female on a men's basketball game, soccer, baseball, football, you name it, I stop what I'm doing and I try to figure out who's the woman doing the game. And so I know, and maybe it's not going to be 5 years or 10 years, maybe it's a generational change, but I know when I stop doing that, when the people in this room stop doing that, when a majority of the people who watch sports stop doing that, that's when I know that we've arrived. But we only get to that if both women and men know that we have to work at this together.
Growing up playing tennis, my dream event to cover, which I don't think will ever happen, but this is my dream event, would be Wimbledon, to do play-by-play at Wimbledon. I want to know what your dream event to cover would be. Hold on here, you cannot say a Bucks championship.
So what am I supposed to say?
Just worldwide, big picture.
Man.
Do play-by-play for us.
Yeah. Well, can I say NBA Finals then? If the Bucks are or are not playing it?
No, can't yet.
See how these journalists work? There's like parameters to the question. They're like trying to pigeonhole you into a corner. I hate the media. I'm a basketball person first and foremost. So if I can't pick NBA Finals, then maybe NCAA Championship. Does that work?
Men and women?
Both, yeah. I go do the women first, and then I fly out and I do the men second. Yeah, that's perfect. I double dip right on the weekend. There you go. There's your answer.
Olympics? Is that ever
I've done the Olympics last summer for soccer, actually. So I've called the World Cup, and I did Olympic soccer last summer. And it didn't really feel, because of COVID, it didn't feel like the Olympic experience. So we were in Stamford, Connecticut, at the NBC headquarters. See some nods. So I would guess that maybe 85%, like that high, 80 to 85% of the announcers were actually in Stamford, Connecticut, not Tokyo. And so that actually made it for an interesting dynamic, because all these announcers are staying in the same hotel. And so you normally don't get to pick the brain of someone who does your job, because if you're at a game, that person is not, or if they're at the game, you're not. So that created a really interesting dynamic to just, walk down the elevator and see people who you've seen on ESPN or, CBS, and we're all in the same place doing the same thing. And so that was really neat.
Parties.
What's that?
Parties.
Well, goodness, so some things that are off the record. No, actually, in all seriousness, we were all pretty boring because of the time change with Tokyo, that we all were working crazy, unusual hours, and sometimes we're literally broadcasting a match or a game, depending on what sport you're doing, at like 2 a.m., East Coast time. So our sleep patterns were definitely thrown off. But I think if I'd feel differently about the Olympics if we could be there. We were calling it off a monitor in literally a little cubicle. So who wouldn't, right? Greg, who wouldn't want to call the Olympics in that manner? Bless Stamford, Connecticut, I just wouldn't want that to be the absolute pinnacle.
So I go to Boston for a few days, and
Sure.
I lose all ability to function and answer emails at a regular time. My whole day gets thrown off because you're kind of focused on your daily tasks, and there's a lot of things to do. That's your life on the road, good portion of it, given the length of the season.
Yeah.
Is it tough just to kind of find those quiet moments, read a good book, pay bills, buy something online, you know what I mean? Just kind of normal creature comfort habit kind of things when you get into the season?
Automatic payments,
There you
right?
go.
That's the key, right? We're in 2022. Again, if you're still paying your bills, writing them out and sending them in, no. We need to talk afterwards if that's still what's going on. In a weird sort of way, I've told people that my life travel-wise has been simplified. And what I mean by that is this, I had done some NBA. A lot of my schedule had been college heavy, and so I would book my own travel in what I'd like to call my previous life until this year. Book your own travel, and I'm doing sometimes 3-4 games a week. So you're flying commercially, booking your own travel, chasing down an Uber or a rental car, checking yourself into the hotel, and now we travel with the team. Myself, Marcus Johnson, Zorn Stevenson, our production staff, our producer director, we travel on the plane with the team. And so I'm sitting there, my first trip, I'm realizing I don't have to check myself into the hotel. There's literally keys laid out on the table for us with your name on it, and I don't have to chase down. The only thing I have to remember is please don't be late for the bus that's going to the arena and then going back to the plane. And so in that way, my travel life has been simplified with this job. And so because of that, I have more freedom to exhale a little bit and take things in. Game day, I'll share this with you. When I'm talking about taking in a moment and just stepping back, one of my favorite times is the national anthem. And I will always close my eyes through the first few verses and just breathe, and no matter what I'm doing, if I'm doing an NBA game or a college game or whatever, I'm just grateful for the moment. And maybe it goes back to that February night at 2 a.m. when I was trying to question, is this all worth it? So I don't take a minute, a second, a day for granted. And that's my moment on game day to just withdraw from what is the bigger moment, take it all in, close my eyes, and then by the end of the national anthem, I'm kind of looking around. I try to do as much as I can in swing, without being distracting. But I try to do as much of a 360 or maybe more appropriate, a 180, and just even looking up into the top corners of where everyone is sitting, taking in the arena. And that's kind of my moment of appreciation and stepping back and just a moment of gratitude of where I had been to where I am now.
We talked about events, but I'm wondering, is there anyone that you would like to call a game with? And someone that maybe you passed during your travels and just missed out getting to be with them on the sideline.
Wow, these are great questions. You guys must be journalists. I will say no one immediately comes to mind, although I will say I think it would be a challenge to call an NBA game with Stan or Jeff Van Gundy because they just throw out the most random stuff sometimes, And I sit there and I think, whatever play-by-play they're with, you know. Sometimes I laugh with them, sometimes I feel sorry for the play-by-play who's with them. So I think that would be a challenge, right, in the NBA world. You know, I didn't know Marcus Johnson before I took this job. And we all know his past, right? The 5-time All-Star. I like to call him Mr. Hollywood, you know, all the movies that he's been in. And so when I took this job, I knew that he would be the key to have a connection with, to find that chemistry with. And I wasn't sure if we would find it, you know. I didn't know him. He called to congratulate me, but it was a short phone call, you know. We didn't know each other. And first practice, I'm sitting next to him, and it was fun, you know. I was like, okay, maybe this will work, maybe it won't. I will say this. So when you work with several different analysts, which I have, men, women, a lot of different sports, you realize that there are some analysts who are very X's and O's heavy. They like to share the analytics of the sport and the game. There are some, like I like to say, like the Dick Vitales of the world, they're very entertainment heavy, you know. They make you laugh, they engage with you. And there are very few who do both. And I think Marcus Johnson is honestly, and I'm not saying this because I'm in this job, because I've told several people who, just me and them in the room, not a bunch of people watching me, or one of my bosses for the Bucks in the back there, but he honestly is one of the best analysts I've ever worked with, if not the best. And this is why, because he does both. You know, he teaches the game. We have these production calls on game day, and it's him, it's pre-post talent producers, it's all our game day producer, director, Zora, myself, Marcus, we're all in the same call, we're talking about storylines. Like he always, it's hard with an 82-game regular season to come up with something new and unique. He's always doing that. He's always finding a different angle. And that is not easy to do. So he teaches the game, but he has fun with the game. And he is so fun to work with. And I feel like we've connected. I feel like we've had fun. And I feel like we've developed a really good chemistry. And for that, I'm also grateful to connect with who I think should be a Hall of Famer eventually. But a guy who's a 5-time All-Star, and like I said, Mr. Hollywood, it's been a fun ride to work with him.
On or off the court, do you have a favorite Giannis moment from this season? And do you have a moment that you can share with us that you've experienced with Giannis that maybe it's a personal moment that stands out?
I've tried to do this as the new kid on the trips and stuff. I've tried to mostly be a fly on the wall. I didn't want to be, you know, those NBA players, and especially Giannis, always get people staring at them, wanting time from them, requests from them. So I just didn't want to be that other person. And so I have tried to pick and choose my moments, especially with Giannis, but more so that's been my approach with all the players and the coaching staff this year. I already shared this story with Richard Deitch. He did a podcast with myself and Kate Scott, who's the voice of the 76ers. And I didn't want to share this story because to me it was like a private moment that I had with him, and I didn't do it to share a story and make it public, but since I've already told it, because Richard Deitch actually asked me a similar question, and I couldn't think of anything else, and it's a great story. So here it is remember back in November where he was talking about Oreos, right? Oreos were his favorite snack, and it was right around Thanksgiving. And I had minimal kind of interaction with him, but it was intentional. And so he had in his post-game press conference in November, he had talked about how the greatest thing in the world is he discovered dipping Oreos into milk and having it as a bedtime snack, which is, we all know, is fantastic. But he had just discovered it. So the next day, we were going on a road trip to Denver. And it wasn't pre-planned or anything. I'm in my car driving to the airport, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to stop off at the gas station, one of those small little packets of Oreos. I said, I'm just going to go to the gas station and pick up one of those packet of Oreos. And so I did. I said, I don't know how he's going to receive this. And so I got on the plane, and I'm usually one of the first ones, either on the bus or the plane. Again, that's a parent thing with if you're not early, you're late kind of thing. So I got there, and I arrived before Giannis did. Thanasis was on the airplane. So I gave it to Thanasis. I said, can you give this to your brother? And he looks at the packet of Oreos and he laughs and he says, sure. So the setup for the airplane is the team plane. Is the players are in the front, coaches, management are kind of in the middle, and then what I like to call some of the riffraff is in the back, like TV, radio, support staff, really the important people, we like to look at it. But that's kind of the setup. So we're sitting in the back, and sometimes by the time we're deboarding, the players are already gone, sometimes they're not. In this trip, when we landed in Denver, I could see Giannis. 6'11" guy, you can see him over a lot, even when he's sitting, right, you can see him. And so he was still on the airplane. And so I thought, okay, so I walked up and I said, hey, did your brother, and before I could even finish the sentence, he got a big smile on his face, that Giannis smile. He turns and he grabs my thing of Oreos from his bag and he pulls it out with a smile on his face and he says, this is going to be my bedtime snack tonight. And so it was great, like I said, I didn't mean to do it to talk about it or to share it. I do think it shows a little bit about him and a little bit about me, and that's what I wanted to do with him, is I wanted him to understand that I appreciate your sense of humor. This is a little bit of my sense of humor, and I think when you're new in a situation like I am, you maybe pick and choose your ways to connect with a player like that, so that was fine.
Have you found a couple places in Milwaukee that you kind of like to settle into? We do get these little chunks of time off if we're going to browse around the Third Ward or downtown or Veterans Park.
Yeah.
Where might we find these?
I love the Third Ward. One of my first places I went with Barry, he showed me Harbor House, and I know that's like up here, and so now I'm ruined. I'm ruined for life, but what I like to do sometimes is just go to the public market, and the beauty of my job is I can work wherever my laptop is, so I can bring my laptop and do research, and I'll just pull up, to one of the stops there. Sometimes I'll have a pint and, a little appetizer or something, and I'll sit there on my laptop and do some work. Elsa's on the Park is great late night after a game. That's one thing that I have noticed is it's hard sometimes after games to have friends over at the game and stuff, but I have enjoyed going over there. So yeah. But I'm exploring the Third Ward, I think, more so than any other area in Milwaukee.
So one of my favorite moments personally with sports is when I was working in Tyler. I spent a week's worth of pay on 4 tickets for me and my dad and my mom and my boyfriend, who's now my husband, so I guess it worked out. It was money well spent. And we got to see Adrian Beltre hit his 3,000th hit. And that to me was like such a special moment, something I'll always remember. And it reminds me why I love sports. What's a moment for you, whether on the job or off the job, where you're like, man, I can't believe I got to experience that?
Yeah. Well, this year, I'll go there already, and it wasn't a moment yet in the playoffs. It was January 1st, so New Year's Day, against the New Orleans Pelicans, and Giannis had just picked up his triple-double, and as most triple-doubles go, he had to get that 10th assist. The assists are always the hard thing to come by when you're hunting down a triple-double. He got his 10th assist, and then the next time down, he does one of those Giannis, he dribbles up to the top of the key, and he launches a jumper and nails it. And he walks back like this, And so my call at the time, because it was New Year's Day, it's the first day of the year. And so my call when I'm watching him, kind of go like this, and the crowd's going crazy at 5-serve, and I said, it's his night and it's his year, as he's going like this. And whatever it was about that moment, it's still one of my favorites from this year. Because you talk about being grateful, and that's one thing that I notice about Giannis, is the joy that he plays in this game. He never takes a second for granted. He remembers where he came from. He remembers when he had to share his shoes with his brothers, and now he owns his own shoe line. Like all that stuff he doesn't take for granted. And for whatever it was, maybe because it was the dorky little dance as he's going back, I just was so grateful to be a part of that moment and to be able to watch him and to have one of the best seats in the house to do that. He's already been voted as one of the top 75 players ever to play in the NBA this year, already at the age of 27. If he keeps it up, stays healthy, arguably top 10, maybe top 5, maybe top 3. And it was, all that was just kind of hitting me at that moment is the opportunity that I have to call that man's games, night in and night out, and to experience some of those moments and to get one of the best seats in the house to do it.
Thank you so much, Lisa, but we're not done yet.
Okay.
Thank you, Delaney, Greg, and Stephanie, too. Do we have any audience questions? Yes, sir. Oh, well, do we have any audience questions? Yes, Nick.
I'm curious how it works, being employed by the team, if you're like sworn to secrecy, because it's not really a journalist role so much. Like, if you see an injury, are you like media blackout, can't talk about it?
Barry, is that a good question for you? Barry Bell in communications, back of the room. The short answer is yes. We get access to shoot-arounds and practices, and I just mentioned that we travel with the team. So you have to understand what your role is there. I used to be at this table, where I was the journalist looking for information and stuff, and I literally have been standing at press conferences, where they're talking to Bud and they ask legitimate questions. I know the answers to them, and then I'm sitting there thinking, oh, that used to be me, And then when you're on the other side, it's definitely a little bit of a switch. But yeah, you know where your paycheck comes from, I'll say that.
Hi Lisa, I'm Dan,
Hi,
or
Dan.
Spectrum News 1. I'm curious about a couple things that kind of went against each other a little bit. You had mentioned how you love kind of feeling the atmosphere, letting the arena breathe, looking around, but at the same time, you just had an Olympic experience where you weren't in the arena, you weren't in
Right,
the
I was staring
stadium.
at a monitor, yeah.
Even pre-pandemic, remote broadcasts were kind of becoming more prevalent, especially at the college level, I think,
Sure.
at the mid-major level,
Yes.
soccer, volleyball, basketball. What differences do you feel calling a game remotely? And what are your colleagues saying about that as an industry kind of standard?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, they're not going away, because it saves money. And it eliminates having the production truck, the big production truck on site. They still have what I like to call the ice cream truck, you still got to patch in the wires and cameras and everything on site, but it's not going away. And so, there have been situations where I have been in this small little room with my analyst, and you're staring at a couple of screens, and then there's been a situation with COVID where they still wanted games to go on, and I would be in one room, and my analyst would be in another room. And so sometimes there would be a camera on the analyst, sometimes there wouldn't, so we would have FaceTime, and so I could just see, his or her reaction to what I was saying. That's the next best thing that we had if you're not sitting side by side. So sometimes there's that dynamic where you're not even in the same room as the person who you're working with, which is very odd. I know some people do it from home now, and so an analyst could be at their home and the play-by-play is at their home, and that's not even like the same studio location. That's like different cities and different parts of the country. So it's absurd technology what we're able to do these days. To compensate, obviously not being there is a challenge. And for me, and to your point, feeling the energy, sometimes, and I hope my hearing is still okay, but sometimes I'll ask our audio person, we have headsets on, we can hear the arena noise. Sometimes I'll ask them, to pump it up just a little bit more. So, I don't feel like I'm in a closet. I feel a little bit more like I'm in the arena. Those are some of the tricks. But you are very limited. You only see what the cameras show you, and that's not necessarily ideal for a lot of different sports. Baseball, softball, incredibly challenging. You think about all the pinch runners, pinch hitters, everything that's going on that's not on the main camera. Let alone when sometimes don't get fooled by the sound of the ball hitting the bat. because it could sound like it's going out of the park and it's a high pop up the short, So if you're the play-by-play, just kind of, control your call a little bit so you know where the ball is going.
Lisa, you talked a little bit about the normalcy that travel with the team kind of has brought you, and also being on the other side, being on the team with the team and not media. Has anything surprised you? Did anything take you did you have an aha moment at some point, maybe early in the season, where, oh my gosh, I'm play voice of a team now. I'm not going from site to site to site or working for a network or anything like that. But this is different than I expected it, or how it all played out.
I think it's watching Jim Olszarski or Eric Name, who constantly covered the team, and they travel like the whole season for their different affiliates, and to watch them fly commercial. We're done with a game, they ask the post-game questions, and then they have a 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. flight the next morning, whereas, we're like, well, we'll see you back in Milwaukee, and we're hopping on the team plane to land. I think it was, also when you're landing, sometimes everything doesn't go smoothly or you have a later tip, and so it's great to be able to get out after the game, but sometimes you're touching ground here in Milwaukee at like 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. So I quite honestly, I'm juiced after I do a game, so it's not easy for me to fall asleep. So I think I would rather have that on the front end, just going to bed later instead of waking up earlier, to fly out that next morning. But I think it was that contrast. It was, okay, we get to be home in Milwaukee, and we're in Brooklyn right now, and you don't land until 11 a.m. tomorrow morning. So it's that realization.
Carolyn?
Okay, so we've established your boss is in the room. We know that. You're in your first year here with the Bucks, and clearly you love what you're doing. At some point, do you think about, is there another role for you down the line within your field, something else you aspire to, depending how things go and what your interests are?
Short answer, no, and this is why. Again, back to that February night when I was in Lansing, Michigan, I was submitting tapes everywhere and not loving or appreciating where I'm at. And the second, it's funny because the second you stop pressing, the second you stop looking, sometimes that's when opportunities open up. And that's what it did for me. But having said this, this is a heck of a job. Let's be honest. And if I could have this job for many years to come, I would be forever happy and forever satisfied. And so you get to call the world champions and one of the best, if sometimes not the best player in the world. And so I think I have it pretty good.
Yes.
So you talked about Giannis and how some fans look at the players, and as a college student, that's kind of how I look at you, like when I see you around the arena or anything like that. You talked about the background noise, that's like my career goal. So being a woman in this industry, and you've talked about perseverance, that 2 a.m. night, is there any advice, I know there's no blueprint, but any other advice that you can offer someone like me who's not yet started on the path but wants to get to where you are one day?
Are you interested in sports?
Of course. Yes.
Sports? Okay. I would, first of all, I'd just say watch as many, unlike me, I mentioned as a little kid, I didn't watch a whole lot of announcers, and so in that way I was playing a little bit of catch up. So watch as many announcers as you can, and maybe that's tiddlywinks, or maybe that's, bags, maybe that, because all that stuff's on TV now. It amazes me what sports programming is out there. But you can always pick up something. That's why I tell people the greatest thing about my job is that I can watch sports and say I'm doing homework, regardless if it's the NBA or anything that might be related to my actual job, because I pay attention to how announcers handle a situation, the big calls, how they work with their analysts, questions that are asked, rules. Sometimes there's something you learn about watching a game, you're like, I've never seen that before, I didn't know that rule. So all that stuff you can pick up by just watching as much as you can. And then the next thing I would say is every single person in this room has received a no. I'd be very surprised if there'd be someone in this room who has not received a no, regardless of any gender barriers, right? Of the just jobs that we wanted. And so my advice is don't let someone else's no be your no. If it might not be the right time for you, But try to understand why that no is coming. Might not agree with it, but try to understand as much as you can from that person's perspective of why you're getting that no. And then make yourself better. You know, don't get bitter, get better is the thing. Because you will receive some no's if you haven't already, but don't let that slow you down.
Hey, you're a busy lady. Yeah, so how do you find that balance between your personal and your professional life?
I'm the most boring person ever. I think it's just, again, going back to the NCAA tournament and learning when to pull back and learning how much you need to do. I think it's knowing how you refuel yourself and what's important to you. I've got family in Minnesota and Michigan still, and some in Chicago, and so maybe on an off day you don't feel like visiting family, but I'll tell you what, every time I get in a car or hop on an airplane, it's always worth it, And so for me, it's that factor is what can fill my bucket, and you got to find moments for that, and you also have to say no. Sometimes I'm not working every day, so I do know how to take a day off and just enjoy myself with a good glass of wine, usually.
Any other questions? Yes.
I watched almost every Bucks game, so I know you have great chemistry with Marcus Johnson and Stephen Bardo. Is there anybody that you worked with, I guess, in the past that you just get assigned to be with them and you're just super happy, you guys have great chemistry, you just love working with that person?
Well, my partner the last 2 NCAA tournament years has been Steve Smith, and he's always been special to me. I've known him for 10 years, and being as a, obviously he had his career in the NBA, but it all had to start right in Michigan and at Michigan State. And so when I was in Lansing, as the local reporter, former players would come back to Lansing, Michigan, and that's one thing that Tom Izzo has done so great, is that he has made the program so approachable, and former players are so passionate about it that they want to come back. And Steve Smith was one of those guys. So I mentioned I'm a one-person band, right? So I've got the camera on my shoulder, literally this mic, in front of Steve Smith, who, by the way, is this tall compared to me, even with heels on. And I'm, like this, right? And asking him questions every time he would come back to town. And he was so gracious with his time. And he's one of those guys that he doesn't care who you are. He's going to be nice to you because you're a human being. And so I met him 10, 12 years ago. And he has always been so helpful to me. And then to be able to get the opportunity to grow our relationship and then to work at one of the highest basketball levels at a national stage, to do it for the last couple of years. I think because of our previous relationship, I feel like we have a good also on-air chemistry. And when you work or you're working alongside a family member, I almost feel like he's like my older brother. And so I love anytime I can sit down with Sweeney and call a game with him.
Anything else? Is my mic on? Okay. Thank you so much, Lisa.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
We Energies, Spectrum News 1, and WisPolitics.com. We have our Gridiron Awards dinner tomorrow night at the Pfister, and on May 24th we'll be playing trivia here, so sign up. Thank you so much.